Thanks for joining us inside the Dancer's Studio, where we bring listeners like you closer to the creative process. Inside the Dancer's Studio is a program of the National Center for Choreography at the University of Akron, as part of our Ideas in Motion initiative. This episode was recorded in the presence of a live audience in February of 2020. Today, we join Christy Bolingbroke, our Executive Artistic Director, in conversation with Brooklyn-based choreographer-director Raja Feather Kelly. Raja is the Artistic Director and founder of the dance theater media company, The Feather Theory. He is a 3-time Princess Grace Award winner. He has created 15 evening-length works for The Feather Theory and has choreographed extensively for off-Broadway theater.
So let me first ask you, how or when did you know you wanted to be a choreographer?
Oh. I knew that I wanted to be a choreographer when I was in college and there was dance club. And I was asked to perform in someone else's work. And I thought that meant that I got to decide what happens in the work.
That wasn't the case.
That was not the case. So I knew that I wanted to be a choreographer, I think then. I have an issue where I can't do the same thing twice, which I also learned in that same rehearsal room where they're like, okay, repeat it. And I'd be like, well, we just did it. So can't we do something else now? So it was in that process that I learned, I think you want to be on that side of things.
But if I remember correctly, weren't you an English major?
I was. I was an English major with a concentration in poetry. And I went to Connecticut College particularly because I could double major, so I was in both departments. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Writing essays, making dances.
Writing essays, yeah. I think there's something very similar about them. I think about dance as essaying. I think about grammar in performance and performance making. I think about where the argument is, how to make a sentence, how to have a full thought in terms of phrasing material or phrasing concepts in dance theater and performance.
I'm going to think more about dance sentences.
Yeah, dance sentences.
I like that. So where do you start? What inspires you?
I am obsessed with popular culture, and I'm obsessed with how popular culture is created. I am obsessed with wanting to understand the question, do we make popular culture or does popular culture make us? I had a particular interest in the work and the life of Andy Warhol when I was also in college, and there was a quote that Andy Warhol purported, and he said, in America, ever since the movies were made, they tell us what to do and how to do it, how to look like how we're doing it, and how to feel like we look like we're doing it. And I feel that my work is always wondering if that's true or not. And so each piece of dance theater that I make tackles a different part of that question. I know that you've seen the show, the Love episode. And so in some ways it tackled how love is presented and represented in popular culture. And so our work is sort of a receptacle of 30, 40 years of popular culture in a moment, in a work, and tries to interrogate it and celebrate it, and then ask the audience if they understand how they might be complicit in what we created.
Well, and for those that haven't seen the Love episode, and you'll correct me if I misspeak, it's almost as if a mashup of if Andy Warhol wrote a Saturday Night Live episode.
That's correct.
And then that is what's performed. Yeah. You often incorporate a lot of popular culture from rapping Kanye West lyrics to referencing reality television episodes too. And so there's a familiarity, I think, in watching your work. It's like, wait, I've seen this before because we're inundated by it all the time. But yet at the same time, would you identify kind of where on the dance spectrum as far as genre? I hear you using the term dance theater.
Yeah. I would certainly say we are in the devised dance theater. I think that's the genre. And that's particularly because there's no content without form for us, and there's no form without content for anyone. But for us, it's like, we're really interested in us. I talk about the company. I have a company of about 7 core members, but about 18 members at large that continue to come back to the work and leave and come back. So I say we because I utilize that structure to make the work that we're making. It's not just me, although I do concept first, meaning that I come up with the concepts and then I present them to the company, and then the company is like, well, here's how I relate to that. Here's how I relate to that. And that begins a devised experience of like, where does the information come from? If it's a person in the room, where are we getting that in terms of culture? How do we recreate that, comment on that, and serve it back to audiences? I think when I remember in college, accessibility was a big topic. So somehow in the early 2000s, a conversation that was happening, to my knowledge, was about how audiences were interacting with performance, postmodern performance particularly, and how it was being made accessible to them. And that stuck with me because that was the conversation at the time when I was wanting to make work. And popular culture to me felt inherently accessible, even to people who were like, well, I don't listen to pop music. Like, I don't know Selena Gomez. She's like, not my thing. Like, who is Britney Spears? And I'm like,
they're lying.
Yeah. I'm like, okay. Right. I'm like, the way you say Britney Spears tells me that you know like, who is Britney Spears?
Yes, you have some
like, you know
Spears
who she is.
context.
Yeah, exactly. So that to me was always an exciting doorway into being able to talk about bigger, different human things. Popular culture was always, and still for me, is a doorway into those things.
So since a lot of the popular cultural references you've been bringing up have been musicians, music artists, how would you characterize your choreographic relationship to sound?
My choreographic relationship to sound. My choreographic relationship to, I'm going to keep repeating that until something tings. How would I characterize
your choreographic relationship to sound?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, I'm not sure if this answers.
It's however you want to interpret it.
I would characterize my choreographic relationship to sound as a soap opera. In that, I certainly believe sound and or music is a director in the work. And so something that, and you know, and now I will tell you all, I watch a lot of television. I watch television all day, all night. Television, movies, TV, I take as much of it in as possible. And I had a particular change of relationship to sound maybe in 2009 or so, where I do this thing where I watch TV where I try to guess the line. I try to guess what's going to be said, and I'm very good at it now. I can watch it and I'm like, I don't like you. I don't like you. Please leave. Please leave. And I'm like I'll have to show you. I'm very good at guessing. And then I couldn't figure out why I was good at it until I questioned in some way, like my relationship to the sound, like to the sound score that happens underneath television and movies. That's telling you what to do and how to feel. And I was like, oh my God, like it's sound.
Right.
Like it's all in the like, Christy.
Yeah.
Please leave. You know, like, it's just like, it's all, the sound is like leading you to, it's like a trope. So in some ways, I think I characterize that as like current day soap opera, where soap opera, like the music was a character, and this, it's like more insidious.
Even your verb usage of and now we're really diagramming dance sentences now. But that the sound is directing, is a director in the dance, is very telling and interesting to think about. Let me ask you this. How do you name a dance work?
I usually start with a name.
Really?
Yeah. Because for me, if I don't, the dance could be anything. So for me, because I call in some ways, and I have to like try to figure out to find a new word, but because I call my dances like receptacles, they're like receptacles. I'm like, this container
is holding your ideas.
Is holding the idea. So like the love episode, it's very easy when we're making devised work to decide what doesn't belong in the work. We're like, oh, that's not for this piece. That's not for this piece. And so when we name it, you know, if you think about the mind or our process as a cabinet, we're like, okay, we can file this in the love episode. We can file this in ugly. We can file this in McCarthy era. These are names of works that we are working on. We can file this in Fantasia. We're certainly better at knowing what doesn't belong in a work versus what does. And so naming it first helps us to contain that.
How many containers or work titles do you have at any given time to do that sort of filing system?
3 years ago, we changed our mode of working. So it's very difficult to be a choreographer if that isn't clear. And
I think you have a lot of empathy in your room.
Yeah, I just feel like you all know. And usually, and I can say for the first maybe 6 or 7 years of my process, it was you make one work and then you find a place to present it, and then you go back to square one. You're like, okay, so now I need an idea, and then I need dancers, and then I need money, and then I need someone to put it on, and then I need a tech person. So that sort of process was not exciting for us. We decided, well, what if we're working on multiple projects at a time, so is that we as a company can always be in process. And when a presenter or a commission or something comes in, we actually are able to do what we want to do, and we're not like, oh, okay, let's make this piece for this venue, or let's make this piece for this commission, but here's what we're working on. Like, we have a process, we have an approach to making work, and we're working on these 5 projects. We're currently working on 4 projects right now at the same time. And depending on what, where we can find funding and that it fits into that, we don't feel like we're ever suffering. We're like, oh, all right, well, we can just do our day-to-day practice with this. And then, oh, we're going to go on a residency, and they want a residency that has like a community aspect. Well, we're not going to just create a community aspect. This project involves community people. And then we don't feel like we're changing our work in order to get support, because then that sort of doesn't feel good in a way.
Yeah. It sounds more proactive than reactive.
Yeah. We work on 4 projects at a time, and we feel like that allows us to stay in process always. So then once a show is over, we're not like, gotta get an idea. We're like, okay, great. So rehearsal for McCarthy era in the morning. Great. Good night. And I think the morale and the ethics of the company and the people who are involved, I think they feel that they are able to invest more, because they're not like, oh, well, this project is over, then like, we're not going to have anything. They're like, oh, we'll perform. The performance has a lot less preciousness around it. Feels like we can go in, we're doing this thing, and then tomorrow we might be rehearsing something else.
It sounds a little bit, and I know you've done work with opera and theater, so it sounds a little bit how repertory theater companies or operas would operate. They have usually 3 or 4 things in rotation. They might not call it all process, because maybe they already have the script. They're not navigating it, and devising it from the start. But it sounds like maybe you've borrowed a little bit of that experience and said, wait, this works.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we don't... Yes and no. I mean, I don't think you're suggesting this, but I want to make it clear. We've never brought a piece back once we've made it. So we are not a repertory company in that way, but in the structure, very similar in that.
The content isn't repertory. Right. But what works within that model. Fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how do you get out of a creative rut?
I watch TV. I go to the movies.
It sounds like it's a constant source, which is great.
Well, the thing with popular culture is on a 10-day cycle. So
can you explain?
So something that is popular today in 10 days might not be popular anymore. Or why it's popular or who it's popular for will have some sort of legible shift in 10 days.
Okay.
And that's usually like a rule for us as well, because some things do stick. So if we're like, okay, we're working on, like with the love episode, and we're like, oh, this is really popular right now. Like the idea that every story has Romeo and Juliet. Any love story has a modicum of the Romeo and Juliet story embedded in that. We're like, okay, let's find one. And then we're like, okay, then there's this song that's like kind of related to it. And here's people who are talking about it. And then we'll watch it for 10 days. And we'll see it change. It's like, well, actually, no, it's not. You follow like the thread of conversation, and over 10 days it'll change. Well, for example, let's say, there's like a media flare up. They're like, oh, Beyonce's in a fight with Katy Perry. 10 days, we're onto something. Like it doesn't, they're like, and this is going to change culture forever because they are in a real serious fight. In 10 days, we'll be over it. We'll be onto something else.
We're done.
So those are like two examples of like something more superficial and then something perhaps more impactful in terms of culture, and how over 10 days it could be a completely different conversation.
It sounds like that you also giving yourself sort of this built-in time, and I'm sure some things might move faster. Some things it might stick for 2 or 3 10-day cycles, but that to me also seems to be subverting the idea of a linear making model, right? Where you go in and you're making the piece and you have X number of weeks of rehearsal and this is your premiere date. And I think it sort of counters that idea that you just have to always move forward. You're like, no, sometimes there's a little plateau.
Yeah.
And then maybe it continues, and then maybe it zigzags and finds other ways of thinking about that. I like it.
I think also we change often. And so something when I performed a lot, and this difficulty I have of doing the same thing twice, I think made me consider what a rehearsal room could be made me consider differently what a rehearsal room could be. So I noticed that when I was in a lot of companies where there was a lot of partnering, and I thought I was a good partner. I think I'm a good partner, but I would often change my approach to partnering. And it wasn't until like with David Dorfman's company where it's like the partnering is very intense. It's like, I don't know, playing football between just like 2 people. You start to build a certain amount of trust, and then you're like, oh, this actually does make sense. Like our bodies change every day. I'm a different person today. Things, I've eaten, things I've experienced in my life over the course of like 5 years of touring a work is going to change the way that I approach the room. And so if there's room to be able to grow and to bring my full self, then there's not like a tyranny of like, well, this is the way we did it this one time, and if we're not exacting that every time, then it's not the thing. That doesn't work for me as a human. I think that if we were allowed to shift and change, we would in processes like this. And so being able to do that in that company and then sharing that with other performers in other companies, it's something that was like a bottom line in my company, and almost a rule where I'm like, you can't do the same thing twice. You just, it's a part of our approach. It's an ethic. It's a pillar. Change.
So how do you navigate between new or old movement vocabulary? Now you have a growing body of work. Are there this is a quintessential feather theory step, or every dance has a ball change, wherever you might.
That's David Dorfman. I think that I don't believe that we have in movement. We have many. I don't know, but I don't know. I would have to ask someone who's seen our work more, because I don't know if I can see it. I do think there's an approach to how we do things that shows up a lot, and people are like I've noticed people are like, that's so you. And I'm like, what are you talking?
Yes,
what does that mean?
Yeah.
And there's a certain style, I think, that is not in movement, but in the way that it's presented. And often people think we're improvising. And that feels particular. And I think for me, it's because while I need you to get there, from there to there at a certain time every time, and I want you to do these 4 moves in this sequence while saying this, the exact way I want you to say it, those are the rules, but I'm also going to say you can't do the same thing twice. So like, how then do you approach getting from here to here with the same 4 movements, with the same text said in the exact way to communicate every time we do this thing, but I'm also saying you can't do the same thing twice.
Right.
Like that, I think starts to, like that becomes there's an approach to how you figure out how to do that. And that I think once you see the work more than once, you're like, oh, that is what the approach is.
Yeah.
I see the approach. And that has to do with who you are as a person and how you motivate yourself over there with the language and structures that I give you.
Yeah.
Which in some ways is what I believe we're always doing all the time, right? Like we all go get gas, we all order coffee, we all use the bathroom. It's the same set sequence of events that we do all the time. And I would challenge us to imagine or to believe that we would never do that. We don't even think about doing it twice the same exact way. Although you think you are, even if you're driving, like, oh, I'm going to grandma's house. I go to, Sycamore Street. I take a left, I count 4 houses and I make my right. I go that way. It's the same every time. Different music, you're wearing something different. The way you turn the wheel is different. Like you're not doing it the same way.
You might get stopped by traffic.
Right. It might be sunny that day. You're driving a little bit slower, so all of that changes. And I think acknowledging that change and acknowledging that malleability makes the work feel more alive and more present, which is why audiences sometimes believe that we're improvising.
Because you're so hyper present.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing the emphasis on the individuals that are a part of the company and the works. What do you look for in dancers and collaborators?
Reliability.
Which is kind of an interesting tension. I don't want you to do the same thing twice, but you must be reliable.
You must be reliable.
Okay.
Well, it's about trusting the approach, which I think is hard. And we call it the approach in our room. And it's about trusting that approach, which I think can be very difficult, especially when you do something and you're like, I achieved that. Like I got there on time. So why do I have to do it differently? And I'm like, well, you just have to pay attention to the room. You have to acknowledge that things
Colin
are happening.
Was a little bit slower today.
Exactly this. So your reliability, there's also a saying that we have in terms of our approach, which is honest reactions to imaginary situations. That's like the subtitle.
Honest reactions to imaginary situations.
Exactly.
I like it.
So if you are reliable, to me, you will react honestly to imaginary situation. And so if you need to if you're like, okay, how do I reinvent getting over there for the 80th time today in this rehearsal? I'm like, well, react honestly.
Yes.
So if you're pissed off about having to do that, I don't know. Let's see how that changes the room.
Show me.
Right. Like it's the butterfly effect of performance. Cause if you do that, that's going to change. If you approach that with an attitude problem, cause you're like a little tired of repetition, that should change the whole room. So then the process becomes about you seeing how you affect other people.
I think some days you may be choreographing reality shows.
Well, you know what my favorite reality TV shows are.
We're there.
Yeah, I'm like, just, react honestly.
So how would you define virtuosity in dance by your own terms?
Virtuosity, I would say, has to do, the language I would include to create a definition includes commitment, integrity, I would say that virtuosity is someone's commitment to a dancer/performer's commitment beyond their commitment beyond what they believe they can commit to upholding the integrity of the proposition.
Nice.
That's how I would define virtuosity.
I love it. One of the things, so Raja and all of our guest artists this semester are here as part of our Ideas in Motion initiative with the university and the Mary Schiller Myers Lecture in the Arts series. And we've chosen to name this first phase as 21st Century Dance Practices. And there's a reason we didn't call it technique. And I think that's been one of the things we've been grappling with our faculty as we envision, like, what do 21st century dancers need beyond what in the 20th century we've had our ballet technique, we've had our modern technique, and there's just, dance can be so many other things. And so this is why we grapple with ideas around virtuosity. I wanted to also invite you, what does the term 21st century dance practices imply? Because you got this invitation and accepted it.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. I believe that it implies a change, like a what is this called? Thank you. Ugh. Wow.
Kat, she's so good.
Kat, yeah. Like a shift in perspective on what we do when we say we're dancing. That's what I think that implies.
Nice.
That's what I believe that implies.
I have one last question for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. In making a creative life, what is the best piece of advice you've received? And would you mind sharing it with our audience today?
Yes.
Or you can make one up.
Yeah, I won't make one up. But I'm trying to, I really don't like advice. I should say that. That's why I laughed. And I don't like giving advice, so I'm trying to also thwart this. However,
do you want to use truism or?
Well, no. I'll just say that, the best piece of advice, which didn't come in the form of advice, was someone telling me that I couldn't do something. And I was like,
then guess what?
I was like, oh, wow, you just gave me so much power. I'm gonna do it. And even if I fail, I'm gonna be so excited because, like, you have just become like a roadmap of, you just like trying, I just don't believe that anyone can tell someone that they can't do something. So I remember, I'm not going to say who, but I remember someone was like, yeah, well, that would be pretty impossible for you to do. And you probably shouldn't try. And I was like, thank you so much. You're so right. And I never spoke to them again. And I certainly went for it. And some of those things I achieved and some of those things I didn't, but I felt like I was able to decide what was good for me and what success was for me and what I wanted and how I would go about getting it and how I would go about, if I didn't get it, how to continue moving forward. So that was a form of advice that I did not take, and in not taking, was able to persevere.
I think you taught us all so much right there.
Yeah, so.
Everyone, Raja Feather Kelly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Inside the Dancer Studio Lunchtime Talk Series is supported by NCC Akron, the University of Akron, the University of Akron Foundation, and the Mary Schiller Myers Lecture Series in the Arts. Our podcast program is produced by Jennifer Edwards. Ellis Rovin is our composer and editor. Transcription by Madeline Greenberg. Theme music by Flaco Torres. Cover art by Micah Krause. And Julian Curett and Kat Wentz are our artist coordinators. To learn more about NCC Akron, please visit us online at nccakron.org and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at NCC Akron. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform by searching Inside the Dancer Studio. Thank you for listening, and stay curious.